Netflix, I have beef with you.
Wanna pack some beef?
We live in an interesting age of television. I would guess that there are more shows produced yearly now than at any other point in history. That inevitably means that there will be more good TV shows. But it also means that there are so many that I feel inundated by the option overload and sometimes feel like putting my head through the TV. But I digress. That's not what I wanted to discuss today. The real thing I wanted to talk about, the thing that disappoints me, is that they fucking canceled 1899, guys.
I'm so depressed I don't know what I'm doing.
And it's not just that they canceled a show I like, even though that does make me a sad boy. I understand that a show I like getting canceled is always a possibility, and I try to be understanding about it.
I hate you! I hope you die!
But in this case, it's indicative of a much larger, multifaceted issue with streaming services as a whole. And the first level, the bedrock issue, the foundation that's crumbling, is Netflix's finances. In the first half of last year, Netflix saw its stock price plummet after its first quarter earnings report showed quarterly subscriber loss for the first time in more than 10 years. And I know, boring business talk.
I like business.
But it's important to note because Netflix seems to have changed their whole strategy since then. The stock price has since rebounded since then, but the new trajectory seems to already be in motion. Now, to give perspective on the scope of Netflix's situation in the last few years, let's take a look at their output, shall we? If you had to name all the Netflix original shows you could think of, how many do you think you could come up with? Maybe a few dozen, and that's if you had time to sit down and disappear into your mind palace for an hour or two. Now, guess how many shows Netflix produced just in the last quarter of 2021 alone? Did you guess 129? Because I sure didn't. Going back a few more years to 2019, Netflix produced 371 new shows that year, more than the entire TV industry in 2005, according to Variety. That's crazy, dude. That same year, it's estimated that Netflix spent $14 billion worldwide on content. The next year, the spending was down to $11.8 billion, but that's still almost $12 billion spent on TV.
Statistic. Yep.
Do you know how many cheesy gordita crunches you could buy with that kind of cash? 2.6 billion, that's how many. The reason I bring up Netflix's spending is because with that kind of monetary investment, you could see where things might take a left turn at Albuquerque if things don't go the way they expect. So, 371 shows in 1 year. That brings us to the second tier of Netflix's pyramid of shame, quantity over quality. There's no denying that Netflix has some great shows. It would be practically impossible not to have a few when you produce that much in 1 year. But with that output level, there'll also be a dung heap of shows that may not even be that bad. They're just not good enough to garner widespread attention. Do me a favor and go searching through Netflix, away from the stuff they already recommend to you. You'll find a plethora of content you've never even heard of, sometimes with more than one season. With this kind of business model, those lesser known shows are kind of just vacuums inhaling money and giving nothing in return, relying on their popular shows to generate enough revenue to recoup the costs. And honestly, I don't hate that from a content consumer's perspective. It allows more shows to be made that may not have been made otherwise, and it gives Netflix subscribers more of a chance of finding a show they really connect with. But then the stock price stumbles, and Netflix does the only thing they can think to do. It seemed to be full-blown panic mode at Netflix headquarters. I've seen conflicting statements on what their strategy is going forward, from we're cutting spending to spending will remain steady, but I think I figured out their thought process. Spending might remain steady, but the difference will be the allocation of those funds. Cut down the number of shows produced and spend more on shows they know are a surefire hit. And once again, I don't hate it as a strategy, from a business perspective this time, but from a creative and consumer perspective, and when you look at it in practice, I loathe it with the burning hatred of 1,000 suns. And I've seen articles about how Netflix uses completion rate to determine which shows it'll renew, and I have issues with that. First, completion rate sounds gross, and if that's all they need, then 1899 should have been renewed because it definitely got me to completion. Second, sometimes it takes people a while to finish a show, even if they like it. People get busy. Just because they don't binge the whole season in one sitting doesn't mean they weren't planning on finishing it at some point. And C, using completion rate as the sole indicator of renewal ignores the creative and artistic value of a show. Just because a show isn't immediately immensely popular doesn't mean it doesn't deserve renewal, and many times shows will gain popularity over time when they show consistent, sustained quality. And that leads us to the top of the shame pyramid, the one that pertains to 1899. Netflix's attitude towards creators and consumers. Now that might seem harsh, but let me explain. I understand having to cancel a show because it doesn't make financial sense to keep funding it. If a show's been out for a while and isn't gaining any traction, then I get it. But here's the thing about the cancellation of 1899 that really bothers me. Netflix canceled it less than 2 months after its release. And on top of that, it was released only a few days before the beginning of the World Cup, which is kind of like premiering your new sitcom during the Super Bowl and then wondering why it tanked. They didn't even give it a fair shot before axing it. The exact same thing happened to The Midnight Club. It premiered a month before 1899, but Netflix also gave it the heave-ho less than 2 months later. And these shows actually have a couple of things in common that I think makes their premature cancellations even more upsetting. Both 1899 and The Midnight Club are structured as multi-season narratives. From the get-go, they're set up as stories that need to play out over more than one season to fully complete the narrative. It's not like some shows that get picked up for a second season and have to figure out what to do next. No, they went in knowing what they wanted to do after season 1, meaning that their cancellations leave their fans unfulfilled. And I know, just because the show sets out to tell a multi-season narrative doesn't mean it automatically deserves renewal. But the second thing that 1899 and The Midnight Club have in common are trusted past creators. 1899 was created by Yansha Friche and Baran Bo Odar. They had an established working relationship with Netflix because they're also the creators of Dark, a German Netflix show that I highly recommend and is one of my favorite shows of all time. Also listen to the accompanying podcast In the Dark on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That show was a 3-season narrative that needed every bit of those 3 seasons to complete the story, and is widely considered a fan favorite Netflix show. But the thing is, Dark didn't gain most of its popularity until season 2 was already out. So if Netflix was employing its current strategy back then, Dark might have just been a 1-season anomaly. As for The Midnight Club, it was co-created by Mike Flanagan, who has an impressive track record with Netflix. His Netflix works include Gerald's Game, The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Mass. While Midnight Mass is my favorite of his Netflix works, The Haunting of Hill House enjoyed much deserved monumental praise and viewership, so you would think that Netflix would put more faith in him. But no. As soon as he wanted to make something more than 1 season, they said, take a hike. And take a hike he did, because he's moving from Netflix to Amazon after the release of The Fall of the House of Usher this fall on Netflix. And honestly, I don't blame the guy. Go wherever you can be the most creative. But judging from the mediocrity of the gigantic cash cow that is the Rings of Power, I don't know if I trust Amazon either. That is something important to bring up. It's not just Netflix. It's streaming as a whole. Hell, HBO canceled Westworld when it only had 1 more season planned, and now you can't even find it on HBO anymore because they're trying to shop it around to other places. Like, what the hell is that? Anyway, the last thing I'll say is if Netflix needs to reduce their output, just stop greenlighting as many new shows. I would rather have that than you cancel the new show that I've already become attached to only 2 months after you gave it to me. That's like putting a bowl of ice cream in front of me, letting me take 1 bite, taking it back, throwing it in the trash, and then setting the trash on fire. I'm gonna be more upset than if I never knew having ice cream was an option in the first place. In conclusion, Netflix, get your shit together, you messy bitch. Goodbye.